Hello everybody, my name is Sniping Spun. I welcome you all back to my next YouTube video to present to all of you, and it's going to be a quick kind of semi-discussion, semi-thought video. It's just something that recently came to my mind. I started thinking about it, and I feel it's kind of been a thing going on lately in the gaming industry within the last couple years. Even though it's been kind of going on a while since the sixth generation, it's really been kind of a thing since the fifth, sixth generation with the PS1 and the N64, and then the PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and the handhelds like the Game Boy Advance and whatnot. It's been kind of a thing since then, but it really picked up during the seventh generation, and kind of has been a thing during the eighth and now ninth generations. And it's a thing that doesn't just apply to me. I'm sure a lot of you gamers out there have been saying the same thing, especially a lot of older gamers back then when they really started doing it. They're older than me and grew up in the 80s and even the late 70s and actually experienced more of the earlier 90s that I personally probably wouldn't have experienced exactly the same as you guys at the time. But, there's something I think it applies to a lot of us gamers, but I've been noticing it about myself lately, especially for personal experiences and personal reasons myself. But I'm sure a lot of you gamers out there will agree, and while I think it's been kind of picking up specifically in my point of view, for me particularly probably the last couple of years, it really has been picking up since at least like I said, fifth and sixth generation kind of started the concept, and then seventh generation kind of pushed it with download stuff and virtual console stuff and whatnot. But I feel gaming is going a lot ways back to my childhood. I think gaming is bringing back a lot of our older beloved stuff from the past that a lot of us were growing up with back then. And it started with, like I said, the fifth and sixth generation. There was a lot of compilations for old arcade games and old games type stuff on PS1 and N64 and whatnot. And then you had the Game Boy Advance, which had a lot of ports of older systems and stuff like that, like Doom and whatnot, and a lot of old NES games like Zelda and Mario and Excitebike and everything. They did the same thing on the DS. The PS2, GameCube, and Xbox had crap ton of things from Midway to Sega collections, and a lot of gamers that grew up back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s would have experienced those systems when they played the NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Master System, Game Boy, and whatever the hell else. Every gamer would have enjoyed those things. The Wii Virtual Console brought a lot of this stuff that was on Nintendo systems, as well as stuff like Sega and TurboGrafx 16 and whatnot. And a lot of these games and these companies are feeding on what would be considered nostalgia and bringing back a lot of these old games for us gamers that grew up with that stuff playing. And while a lot of that stuff would apply to me back then too, and like I said, I got back into when the Wii came out. Oh, the Virtual Console, I could play F-Zero again, I could play Street Fighter 2 again, I could play all this stuff on top of those collections, like I said, on the PS2 and the GameCube and the Xbox and the PS1, the N64 and the Game Boy Advance and all that sort of stuff. That stuff too. But the last couple of years, there's stuff that I never personally thought would come back with collections and come back with some sort of HD remasters or ports or some sort of thing. And I'm oh my god. They got all the mainstay stuff, and now they're getting stuff that you never would have thought would possibly have made a comeback. Last year, Zombies Ate My Neighbors in Ghoul Patrol, which I never personally experienced back in the day, but I loved Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was one of my favorite Super Nintendo games of all time, and that came out with Ghoul Patrol last year as an HD remaster, and I got the game twice, digitally on Xbox Series S, and I got a physical version from Limited Run Games for the Switch. That's good. Arcade Archives, 2 years ago. Sunset Riders! My god, I loved Sunset Riders growing up. And that came back within the last couple years. We got freaking Saturday Night Slam Masters in this upcoming arcade thing from Capcom coming up this month. Freaking in the Cowabunga collection of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I can play Tournament Fighters again. I grew up playing the Super Nintendo version of Tournament Fighters, and now I can play that, and now I can actually experience the NES and the Genesis versions of those games. It's oh my god, all these games are coming back through either Arcade Archives, HD remasters, freaking ports, remakes, remasters. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1+2, they remade the first two Tony Hawks. I love Tony Hawk, and I'm still pissed that they're not going to be doing 3 and 4 or Underground or anything remasters, at least as of now. Activision Blizzard, can you please redecide, make a new decision on that. Take back the decision of not remastering or remaking those. But that is it too. It's like it's these games from back then, because a lot of these companies know that nostalgia sells, and whether or not they do a full-blown remake like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 kind of a thing, or they remaster stuff like the new Chrono Cross remaster where they just redid the textures and stuff and did a few other little changes, or just porting the game in HD-fying it like Zombies Ate My Neighbors, or like the Arcade Archives, or the arcade version of Sunset Riders, or all these other games collections and ports and remasters and remakes. Gaming has, I think the last couple of years especially, been pushing for that, and has been doing that since the 5th generation. The late 90s started pushing it because I remember them doing stuff to like Centipede and all this arcade stuff. And I never, I was born in 1990. I would never experience the arcade games back in the day. But my mom back in the day played Centipede in the arcades, one of her favorite games. We had the game on the PS1, which was a new game, but brought in classic Centipede. And I remember a lot of Namco collections and Midway collections on the PS1 and N64, and then that same stuff continued on the PS2 and the GameCube and the Xbox with the Sega collection. Once they kind of jumped out of the console market and started doing their games, a lot of their collections started, being put, like a Sonic-specific collection or a Genesis collection. They had a lot of stuff from back then. Then the Wii came out, Wii Virtual Console, and then the Xbox Store brought a lot of classic arcade games back and a lot of classic games back. PlayStation did the same thing. Then the 8th generation, the Wii U and the 3DS continue the eShop on top of Xbox and Microsoft still doing, Microsoft and Sony still doing their stuff. And now in the 9th generation, Switch has its big online store. Xbox has a big store with the Series SX, and PlayStation with the PlayStation 5 still has a lot of stuff. They're still remaking stuff. They're still remastering stuff. They're still doing all this stuff with these new games getting either full-blown remakes, a remaster, a port, a collection, or whatever the heck else they decide to do with these games. And it's coming out more and more and more. There's even a rumor going around that Nintendo's going to be adding the Game Boy to the Switch Online. The Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Advance, we're going to probably be able to play like the original Advance Wars on there. We'll probably be able to play Golden Sun on there. We're going to probably be able to play some like Castlevanias on there and whatnot, even though some of these games are in other collections. There's Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and original Game Boy games they could all throw onto this thing if that ever comes to the Switch Online. And that would be a big throwback for a lot of gamers who grew up with those systems. It's crazy to think that all this stuff, it was a slow trend back in the late 90s, and it picked up in the 2000s, and it kind of slowed down a little bit in the 2010s, sort of like the early 2010s. But over the last couple of years, in the last 2 generations, I think it's been really pushing up, especially for stuff that people would not have expected to come back. Like, who thought we were going to see the Capcom Aladdin game of all things added to the big Disney, like Lion King and Aladdin collection from a few years ago? That was straight up just the Disney ones, like the Sega Genesis Aladdin, and then a Lion King in general, like the one that was made actually by the Disney studio. The Super Nintendo one for Aladdin was made by Capcom. Who thought that they were going to go out their way to probably contact Capcom and put that game as a free DLC update / paid DLC / whatever to that game, so you could play the Genesis version and now the Super Nintendo version? That's cool, and it's like, who would have thought that? And they also threw in Jungle Book as well. It's like, my God. I never would have thought like some of these games would ever get a chance at revival again. That's the thing about it. Like, you thought, they're going to pick the Marios and the Zeldas, and Sony has their franchises like Jak and Daxter and, Sly Cooper and whatnot, and Twisted Metal, which they never brought that back. But I'm hoping one day that maybe Twisted Metal can make a return, as well as Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, and all that. I mean, not saying some of them still don't get games, but like, it'd be cool to get the older games back on more HD remasters, or a full-blown remake in terms of Jak and Daxter or Ratchet and Clank or something. It's like, you knew that they'd pick all the main popular ones, especially the ones that were actually from the companies themselves, like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. But then all these off-the-wall kind of games that we haven't seen in years, in decades, getting returned. Zombies Ate My Neighbors, the Super Nintendo Aladdin, freaking Saturday Night Slam Master, Sunset Riders, a bunch of other arcade archives that you never probably thought you'd see the light of day. Freaking Grandia got HD remasters for a collection on all the systems. Freaking Chrono Cross got a remaster. All this other stuff, everything's coming back. Anything from our childhood, anything from old school gaming back in the early 2010s I mean, not the early 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, and the 70s, all throughout like the late 90s to like the current day have been getting revivals. Gaming from our childhoods, gaming from the past is there and has, it's just a thing. It's really, if you really think about it, it's just a business thing of nostalgia. It's all it is like nostalgia and like capitalizing on old school stuff to make money. But at the same time, what it's also doing is bringing a lot of these old school classic gems of games to fruition for newer gen gamers too. That's the cool thing about it, is this can actually be used to give a lot of newer gen, younger generation gamers the chance to experience this stuff that we grew up on. Like I said, I was able to grow up on some stuff in the 90s and early 2010s that came before my time, through collections, through remasters, through ports and stuff like that. I got my first experience for like the old Mario games from the NES wasn't on NES. It was the Mario All-Stars on Super Nintendo. That was my first time experiencing that. It wasn't the OG ones. It was those. But for a lot of older gen gamers, like a lot of people I work with, they would have experienced it growing up in the 80s playing Mario Brothers in '85. So it's not like it's an original thing now, it's just happening now. It's not just a thing just happening to me, it's happening to all gamers. People have been experiencing this stuff since back then. Since the PS1 and the N64 and the Game Boy Color and the Saturn, and then going on to the Dreamcast and the PS2, the GameCube, the Xbox, the Game Boy Advance and whatnot. And the DS kind of had some, and the Wii did it with the Virtual Console. All this online store stuff, all just porting over old games as old school classics that they could sell. It's been going on for a long time, but I think the last couple of years have been affecting me, especially personally, because it's like Tournament Fighters, Sunset Riders, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Disney's Aladdin, all big games, and some of my favorite games from that generation, on that system, on Super Nintendo. A lot of games that are my favorite from back then, a lot of games I grew up with. The Mega Man X collection, I know they had the X collection, the original collection back on PS2 and GameCube and all that, but then now the Legacy collection has all of them. All X's, all original, and all one big package, and I think that's kind of cool. And it's like reviving franchises and everything. I just think it's awesome. I just think it's a cool thing, and it's just something I kind of just like. It just popped in my head lately. I'm like, oh my god, they're really doing this. They're really bringing back all this stuff, and it's not just the big mainstream popular stuff. It's a lot of niche stuff too. It's a lot of smaller and stuff too. It's a lot of licensed stuff too. You think it'd just be like the mainstay game franchise, but they're bringing back licensed stuff like freaking like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the big Cowabunga collection, all the NES, Genesis, and Super Nintendo games, and the arcade stuff. For people who grew up with all that stuff, which I didn't grow up with every single TMNT game, but I grew up with Tournament Fighters and a few other ones here and there. And so it's a cool collection, but Tournament Fighters especially was one of my favorite fighting games back in the day that wasn't named Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Fatal Fury to some extent, before Smash Brothers and Tekken and Soul Calibur came into the fray as well in my playtime. I just think it's cool. I just think it's cool when you sit down and you think about how gaming has come. It's not just went forward, it's also come full circle. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I say it's up to you. But I think it's cool that gaming has went back to my childhood. It went back to your childhood. It went back to the past as well as going forward. And I think that's a good way of looking at gaming, is having it be a universal, keeping the past relevant instead of just burying it and letting it die, and going forward. And a lot of these old school classics that otherwise would not still be playable now, not be in some sort of playable form on modern day consoles, can now be experienced on modern day consoles. And can be experienced by all. Old, reminiscing about stuff for the younger generation, finally getting to experience some of these games and these classics that otherwise would never have been touched. So hopefully all of you enjoy that. I enjoy it, and hopefully we can see more games. There's a lot of other stuff they could easily be remastering, remaking, putting in collections on like Switch Online and Xbox and PlayStation stores and stuff like that. It'd be really cool. Xbox Game Pass. It would be cool just to get this stuff. That's all I'm saying. And that's it. That's my thoughts. Hope you guys like this. Well, how much is it? 14 minutes now. Hope you guys like this video. Put in the comment section what you guys think. What do you guys think about all this trend of bringing back the old classics to enjoy? What old classics that have come back have you personally enjoyed and are happy made some sort of revival, some sort of return? And what games that have not got that treatment yet do you personally want to see? Because I'm sure we all could come up with some really interesting, unique, and different lists when it comes to that front. And go discuss it down there. My name is Time to Spend. Peace. Please subscribe if you want to. Have a lovely day. and I'll see you later in the next video. Bye, everyone.